welcomed it again is part of the vision of the Circle of Friends to be in partnership with the community, seeking the well-being of our neighbor. And this is Emma, who manages our community garden, but in particular the 5 boxes that we grow for the food bank. She works at a winery, and that's the vintner. I caught a photo of them the other day, bringing all of the compost from the vineyard and putting it into the boxes, because we all know that good gardens are about good soil. Wonderful friends that we claim at the Andrew. Speaking of wonderful friends, it is my privilege to welcome friends Larry Tayler and Sarah Hall. Larry Tayler informs me that this is his 8th presentation. I first met Larry trying to get to his partner, Bill. I didn't snag Bill for what I wanted him for, but I got Larry for the next season, and at that time learned that he had been part of installing a labyrinth at the girls' school at which he taught in Toronto, and I went, whoa, you do labyrinth? Come and talk. So that's where the journey of our lives that has been a labyrinth began, I think. Sarah Hall showed up a little bit after that time. Sarah Hall, I have enjoyed getting to know she and Jeffrey, but on one occasion, and this was in 2019, there was an event here. I think it was a music or an art event. And we knew that despite all of the transformation we'd made to our property, outside, et cetera, pews long gone, that if we wanted a season of further partnership with the community, we were going to have to take on the darkness and really traditional feeling of this space. So I encountered Sarah. I said, Sarah, we need help. And she says, I have just the person for you to talk to. And she introduced us to Dr. Doreen Balabanoff, architect, stained glass artist. And it was Doreen that gave us this architectural aesthetic plan for this season, and we haven't looked back. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to share our story and then to let some of you know what the next week is happening in this vicinity. So, as we gather for sacred practice, as we come from our own unique journeys, as we come from a world that worries us, I invite you to take a few deep breaths. Within our sacred tradition, the word spirit, both in Hebrew, Aramaic, and the Greek, is the same word for breath. And so every time we take these deep breaths, we are communing with the cosmic spirit, the cosmic mystery that we have called God. And at the same time, recognizing we're sharing breath with one another. So at the same time, we are in communion with one another as fellow pilgrims. Let us pray. Holy mystery, in the beginning, before words, before walls, before fear, your breath moved across the deep, calling forth life, connection, and possibility. We gather as a circle of friends drawn by the same breath to listen, to wonder, to be shaped again. Through ancient story and present voice, through glass that catches light and hands that refuse harm, you speak still, inviting us towards a more human way. Soften what is rigid in us, illuminate what is hidden, and unmake the habits of violence within and around us, and form in us a courage that chooses peace. In this beginning moment, make us open to beauty, to truth, to one another, and to the quiet, transforming work of love. May it be so. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. Lynn, thank you for your kind words, as always. It's good to be back at the Andrew. This year, I'm not the only one speaking. I'm sharing the microphone with my dear friend Sarah Hall, the renowned glass artist. Sarah and I share a love of ideas, theology, and long conversations over tea. It turns out that we also share a love of the book of Genesis, the first book of the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, which also means it's the first book of what many Christians call the Old Testament. And Genesis just happens to be our topic this morning. Traditional scholarship holds that Moses, with divine inspiration, wrote Genesis about 3,400 years ago. Other scholarship believes it was written by anonymous human authors and didn't reach its final form until about 2,500 years ago. I'm in that camp. Traditional scholarship also holds that Genesis reflects an all-knowing, all-powerful God fully in charge of the universe. Other scholarship believes the book represents God's evolving understanding of creation, especially when dealing with human beings. In other words, God in training. I'm in that camp. The first three books of Genesis are in the beginning. The title of our presentation is In the Beginnings, with an S. We were inspired to add the S after we discovered a marvelous book of poetry. Show and tell. By the Jewish lesbian poet Jessica Jacobs. Her subtitle is Poems in Conversation with the Book of Genesis. The first poem in that collection is titled In the Beginnings. By pluralizing that word, Jacobs opens up the complexities and power of Genesis. And Genesis is complex, because life is complex. Way too complex to pigeonhole into only one beginning. We are all plural, to paraphrase Walt Whitman. We are all an infinity of beginnings. The conundrum that Sarah and I faced was how to honor the complexities of Genesis in 40 minutes. Cue the laughter. Although Genesis is only 67 pages long, 50 chapters, it runs the gamut from two creation stories to the arrival of humans, from the Garden of Eden to the expulsion from Eden, from the first murder to Noah's Ark, and from the flood that God sent to drown most humans to God's recognition that maybe that hadn't been such a good idea. And all that, with the exception of God's oops, happens in just the first 6 chapters, 8 pages. And how did God get from creating this fabulous planet and its inhabitants to throwing up God's hands in frustration and drowning almost everyone in only 8 pages? As Genesis says in chapter 6, quote, "And the Lord was sorry that the Lord had made humankind on the earth. I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created," unquote. And there's still 59 more pages to go. Genesis is packed with enormous passion and monumentally powerful stories that reverberate to this day. Whatever your religious beliefs or lack thereof, we live in a world whose very metaphors and cultural foundations have been influenced by the 50 books, the 50 chapters of the book of Genesis. For many, these metaphors and foundations are invisible. That doesn't mean they're not there. So here's what Sarah and I have come up with. Sarah is talking about the first chapters of Genesis, the creation stories. There's more than one. She'll be doing this through the lens of her evocative glass creations. You're in for a visual and intellectual treat, my friends. After that, I'm moving us to the other end of Genesis to talk about Joseph, he of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame. I'll look at how he evolved from being a spoiled brat to articulating a remarkably relevant and contemporary vision of how a different kind of forgiveness can break the cycle of violence. Sarah, please.
I think we want to move the microphone over.
Absolutely. Okay.
There we go.
You adjust it accordingly.
Okay. I can work with this.
This and then.
Yeah. Wonderful.
You're fine?
Yes. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Larry. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm delighted that Larry asked me to share this talk with you. And in the beginning, we had no idea where it would go. But I've settled on sharing with you my artistic and spiritual journey, illustrated by 5 windows that were made during my career, based on creation stories. And I view my talk as being able to give you a few threads that can be woven into Joseph's coat of many colors. In the first window, my rose window at Immaculate Conception Church in Woodbridge in 1991, I'm dealing with the scripture based on creation. There are 2 separate accounts of creation in Genesis, one followed by the other. In the first, God is a calm, cosmic entity with a master plan. And in the second, God is a human-like figure walking in the garden and has a totally haphazard approach to creation. In stained glass, there's a very strong tradition of showing creation within 7 separate little circles, like little bubbles. But in my window, creation is centered on Scripture, but it is not static or easily contained. The technique in my window is leaded stained glass, the same technique that has been used for over 1,000 years. Glass blowers make and color our glass. The separate pieces are leaded together. And stained glass has a very special relationship with light. It is the only art form that is viewed with light passing through it. Techniques like acid etching, painting, and silver stain are used in my window. Some of these techniques require kiln firing. My kiln for firing the glass was very small, 2 feet by 2 feet, but this was typical for most studios. Anybody here want to be up on that scaffold? Stained glass is a very precise art form. And along with my ideas that I wanted to express, I had to ensure the stability of the scaffold, tremendous number of technical details, the safety of the artisans. And you can't make a window larger or a different shape because you like the idea. It needs to fit perfectly. In my window, there is an energy and radiance of light that penetrates all of creation. The equality of man and woman, as written in the first account of Genesis, was very important for me to portray. The second window is a story from another culture. This window was made in collaboration with the Chippewa of Nawash from the Bruce Peninsula. I've made over 800 windows, and only 3 have been artistic collaborations. There was no one in the Chippewa community who made stained glass, and I was invited to translate their sketch and add a seasonal border. The site was the entrance foyer window at Bright Shores Hospital, Wyerton, in 1993, and the technique is once again leaded stained glass. The sketches that the Chippewa artist Naomi Smith gave me illustrated the story of Nanabush and the butterflies, and I'll share that with you. It's from Ojibwe culture. Long ago, the first human twins were born to Spirit Woman. She relied on the animals to help her care for them. The bear gave his fur to warm them. The colt let them ride his back. The squirrels brought nuts and food. The beaver and muskrat bathed them, and the birds sang lullabies. The dog was an excellent guardian, but as the babies grew, he noticed they were not walking. He brought his concerns to Nanabush, who decided to call on the Great Spirit. In reply to his call, the Great Spirit told him to gather thousands of tiny stones. Nanabush did as he was told and gathered stones of blue, red, yellow, and green. He sat beside the pile of stones and watched them, but nothing happened. He tossed some of the small stones in the air, and to his astonishment, they turned into winged creatures of many colors and shapes. The beautiful creatures fluttered here and there before crossing to rest on his shoulders. These were the first butterflies. The butterflies followed Nanabush back to the twins. They crowed with pleasure, waved their legs, and stretched out their arms to the beautiful butterflies. The butterflies always flew just beyond the grasp of their small outstretched hands. And soon the twins began to crawl, then to walk, and even to jump and run in their efforts to catch the butterflies. This is how we learn to stand on 2 feet. It's better without the glasses. I would like to share what I learned about storytelling through collaboration. It was a different perspective than Scripture. Stories do not directly teach right and wrong. It is more about sharing wisdom, memory, and culture. A story can never be told to have achieved its final form. All stories are works in progress. The third window was made for the chapel of Our Lady of the Bay Secondary School in Collingwood in 1996. My technique is still leaded stained glass. In initial conversations with the chaplain, they asked for the days of creation in 7 circles. However, I was very interested in bringing a sense of place anchored in local history. I have always had a great love of maps, and I heard that some of the sketches of Champlain's map were made near Collingwood, so I incorporated elements of the map into the window through screen printing. The glassblowers made special sheets, and I now have larger kilns for firing the glass. Champlain's map possessed all of the elements of creation that I could ask for. Adam and Eve are portrayed as from his sketches of First Nations people. And when I was putting together this presentation, I noticed that I have given over 2/3, maybe 75% of the window to objects of light and sunlight, the sun, the moon, and the stars. This fourth window is now 10 years later. I have a design studio in Toronto, but the fabrication has moved to Germany, where there are many techniques and facilities. Once again, I have been invited to make a creation window. It is for the narthex of Rose of Lima Church in Toronto in 2005. In many projects, I am now working with painted and fired enamels on float glass. And this is possible because of the large size of the kilns in Germany. The size has grown from 2 feet by 2 feet to 20 feet by 20 feet. This window is made with painted glass, not the leaded glass technique. One of my mentors was Professor Ursula Franklin, a physicist at U of T, who encouraged my work in solar and environmental glass. Ursula's colleagues at U of T worked on a project called First Light. It is the first image of the universe from a time long before there were any stars or galaxies, when all of space was filled with almost perfectly uniform mixture of hydrogen and helium gas, radiation and dark matter. First Light gives us a snapshot of the tiny variations in the density of the primordial gas. This image shows the beginnings for all of the marvelous structure we see in the universe today. Making this window in glass was a tremendous technical challenge. It almost drove me crazy. And here in my window, the scientific image called First Light frames a momentous event of fire, light, and sea and sky. In my fifth and last project, another decade has passed, and I have an exhibition window in a church that has been in existence for almost 1,000 years. Basilica St. Gangolf was built in 1170 in München-Lore, Germany. And here is the site for the window. It's above a beautifully carved altarpiece that dates from the 15th century. My technique is experimental. Clear glass from the same sheet as the base glass is encased in a pillow and beaten to death with a hammer. And it makes a pile of broken bits. This broken glass is scattered onto the base glass along with colorful frit and fired in the kiln. This technique is usually used for smaller pieces, but here I have used it on a large scale. However, if too many unrelated elements were added to the windows, they flew apart as they cooled. And so I had to proceed very, very carefully to ensure stability. The altarpiece tells a human story in a magnificent way, and it seemed fitting to have the windows simply express radiant light. In Genesis, God's very first words were, "Let there be light." In fact, it's the second sentence of Genesis. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw the light was good. Thank you very much for listening to my story about making these windows. It's a privilege to share these many colored threads with you, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. My friend Larry Tayler is a person of remarkable insight, so please welcome him.
I spent years being on the stage crew. It's nice to have a stage crew doing something for me. I love it. Sarah, thank you so much. What a privilege this has been working with Sarah over the last few months, especially at the beginning when we had no idea what we were going to do, and we just kept talking and gnawing away at it, and it emerged. I took a couple of wrong turns, but anyway, it worked out. So my part of the presentation is entitled "A Different Kind of Forgiveness," and it focuses on the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. A lot of things go wrong in the book of Genesis, and a lot of people make mistakes. Even God admits to having made a mistake when God flooded the planet and drowned almost every living thing. Thank you. When things go wrong in the Bible, punishment and reckoning are rarely far behind, especially in the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible. And sometimes people seek forgiveness when they know they've done something wrong or when they're caught doing something wrong. Today, I'll not only explore the story of Joseph, but also Joseph's compassionate and remarkable approach to forgiveness, a different kind of forgiveness. So Joseph, do you remember him? As I mentioned earlier, he of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame. He's not the Jesus Joseph. That Joseph is at the other end of the Bible. Now we're talking about the Dreamcoat Joseph at the beginning of the Bible. You'll find the story of Dreamcoat Joseph in the last 14 chapters of the book of Genesis. That's about 1/4 of Genesis. So it's a pretty big deal in the Bible for both Jews and Christians. Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And there's a Quinty connection to Jacob. On Victoria Avenue in Belleville, at the intersection of Bleecker Avenue, you'll find the Sons of Jacob Synagogue. Jacob was the third and final Jewish patriarch in the book of Genesis, the first two being Abraham and Isaac. Jacob's 12 sons are considered the progenitors or founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's only recorded daughter was Dinah, and she has her own interesting and disturbing story, but she's not our focus today. Back to Joseph. Some theologians might disagree, but from my point of view, Joseph as a child, and as I said earlier, was a spoiled brat. He was also his father's favorite son. He was born in Jacob's old age, and his mother, Rachel, was Jacob's favorite wife. Sidebar. Jacob had 2 wives, Leah and Rebekah, and 2 concubines, Zilpah and Bilhah, all at the same time, leading me to think that the biblically approved form of marriage at that time was obviously polyamory. But I digress. Now, because Joseph was his father's favorite son, Jacob gave Joseph the so-called coat of many colors to show how much he loved him. This just rubbed it in the noses of his brothers that he, Joseph, was his father's fave. Add to this the fact that Joseph snitched to his father regularly about naughty things his brothers had done, and, worst of all, had the annoying habit of interpreting his brothers' dreams to mean that they would all someday bow down to Joseph, meant that things often got a little testy between Joseph and his brothers. The fact that Joseph interpreted his brothers' dreams correctly in the long run was quite beside the point. The really nasty part of this story begins in chapter 37. The brothers, with the exception of Joseph, are pasturing their father's herds some distance from their home in the valley of Hebron. Jacob says to Joseph, quote, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me," unquote. In other words, keep an eye on your brothers and tell me if they're doing anything wrong. When the brothers see Joseph approaching, they conspire to kill him. Quote, "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal devoured him," unquote. You can just feel the hatred that Joseph's brothers had for him. His brother Reuben adds a note of caution, however. Quote, "Let us not take his life," Reuben said to them. "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here instead in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of the robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, the coat of many colors, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it, unquote. They were just going to leave Joseph there to die in the desert heat in the bottom of a waterless pit. But soon there was a pivotal change of plan. A camel train of merchants passed by on their way to Egypt, and the brothers sold Joseph to the merchants for 20 pieces of silver. And so off Joseph went to Egypt, not knowing that he was about to start an essential and ultimately heartbreaking chapter in the history of Judaism and, by extension, Christianity. Meanwhile, the brothers took the coat of many colors, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in the goat's blood, and then on their return to Jacob, they said to him, quote, "This we have found. See now whether it is your son's robe or not," unquote. Jacob recognized the robe and wailed, quote, "It is my son's robe. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces," unquote. Then Jacob, quote, "tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son for many days," unquote. And the brothers thought they had very cleverly solved their problem with Joseph. But nothing is ever that simple when you're dealing with the Bible. According to Genesis, once Joseph arrived in Egypt, quote, "the Lord was with him and he became a successful man," unquote. Here are the highlights of Joseph's time in Egypt. When the merchants who purchased Joseph from his brothers arrived in Egypt, they sold him to Potiphar, a high-ranking Egyptian official who served as Pharaoh's captain of the guard and overseer of Pharaoh's prison. Joseph was a slave, but he soon proved himself to be a gifted administrator and organizer, thus earning the trust of Potiphar. So much so that Potiphar appointed him manager of his household and his large personal estate. These things went well for Joseph until Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. Joseph rejected her advances. In a fit of pique, Potiphar's wife sought revenge by accusing Joseph of molesting her, which is how Joseph ended up in Pharaoh's prison. Sidebar. This part of the story is uncomfortable reading for me. My instinct is to believe female victims of sexual assault, but clearly the writers of the book of Genesis had other agendas. Back to Joseph. While in prison, he earned the prison warden's trust and ended up managing the prison, of course. Joseph was also earned a reputation for being able to interpret dreams. Remember that the Lord was with him. After 2 years in prison, Joseph was summoned by none other than Pharaoh himself to interpret a disturbing dream that he'd had. One where he saw 7 fat cows full heads of grain, followed by 7 skinny cows and scorched heads of grain. Joseph said the dream was a divine prophecy that Egypt would have 7 years of abundant crops, followed by 7 years of dire famine. To deal with this, Joseph recommended that Pharaoh appoint a wise leader to store 1/5 of the grain crop annually during the good years, so that the Egyptians could survive the subsequent famine. Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph's wisdom, he appointed him as his second in command over all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. In that role, Joseph coordinated the building and filling of grain silos throughout Egypt, as well as the distribution of that grain during the famine that followed. Joseph became Pharaoh's trusted advisor. The famine not only affected Egypt, but also the whole eastern end of the Mediterranean, including where Joseph's family and the Hebrew tribes were living, and where they now were starving. Joseph's father and brothers had heard rumors that Egypt had wisely stored its grain surpluses during the abundant years, not knowing, of course, that it was their son and brother who engineered it all. At Jacob's command, Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt to purchase grain to keep the Hebrew people from starving. When they had an audience with Joseph, they bowed down to him, fulfilling the dreams that Joseph had correctly interpreted, and begged him to sell them grain. Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Initially, he treated them harshly to test their character, but eventually he agreed to sell them the grain. Later, Joseph secretly returned their money. The brothers had no idea of his true identity. On a subsequent visit to purchase more grain, the brothers met with Joseph once again. This time, he tearfully revealed his identity. The brothers were dumbfounded. The man they had sold into slavery, the man they had wanted to kill, was the man who was now saving them. In the words of Genesis, quote, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors," unquote. Joseph instructed the brothers to bring their father Jacob and their families to live in Goshen, the most fertile part of Egypt, for the duration of the famine. And thus began a very painful chapter in the history of the Jews, their exile in Egypt, and later their times as Pharaoh's slaves. Ultimately, this led to their escape from Egypt, their exodus. However, that's the second book of the Jewish Bible. But we still have unfinished business with Joseph, his brothers, and the nature of forgiveness. 17 years after migrating to Egypt, Jacob died at the age of 147, at least according to Genesis. Joseph became the Jewish leader. His brothers, however, were afraid with Jacob gone, Joseph would punish them. Quote, "What if Joseph pays us back in full for all the wrong we did to him?" Unquote. So they went to Joseph and begged, quote, "Please forgive our crime," unquote. Joseph's first response was to weep. And then Joseph said something absolutely remarkable. Quote, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones." In this way, he assured them, speaking kindly to them, unquote. A lot of people, including some theologians, assume that Joseph forgave his brothers in that speech. But in fact, he did not. What he did do was assure his brothers that God had taken the evil they had done to him and transformed it into good. Joseph would not punish them. Instead, he would care for them and their family. As for forgiveness, well, Joseph said that was God's work, not his. "Am I in the place of God?" he said. In Joseph's response, there is no reckoning. there is no punishment. There is no forgiveness in the traditional understanding of that word. All those are left to God. Some believe the ultimate arbiter. But it goes deeper than that. Sometimes forgiving others is impossible. Sometimes forgiving ourselves is impossible. Sometimes, with the wounds of a broken heart, but without the elusive satisfaction of revenge, we have to accept what has happened. And then we are faced with a profound choice. We accept with love, or we accept with enduring animosity. If we accept with love, we are not excusing, nor are we forgetting, but we are allowing the transformative power of love to start the healing for those who have wronged us and for ourselves. The point is neither retribution nor punishment. It is instead transformation. There are no guarantees, and there are no easy fixes, just the profundity of acceptance and love. And just so we're clear, Joseph has let go of the seductive but pernicious impulse to punish. He is breaking the cycle of violence. He is not only doing that for the good and the healing of his people, but also for the good and the healing of himself. Compassion for others starts with compassion for self. It's a different kind of forgiveness. And it's something else too. And it's only been in the last few weeks that I've started understanding this. It's not just a different kind of forgiveness. It's a different kind of love. Reframing this different kind of forgiveness as a different kind of love gives me a fragile, imperfect, barely visible glimpse of what it might mean to love my enemy, about what it might mean to fulfill Jesus' profound and perplexing command in the Sermon on the Mount, quote, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you," unquote. And that's as far as I've gotten with that one. It's very much a counterintuitive, complex work in progress. And all this from just 14 chapters in Genesis. I finish with a quotation from Jessica Jacobs, the poet whose brilliant 2024 book, Unalone, I've referenced earlier. Her words provide an apt conclusion for my presentation. Remember, these stories are old ones, and they repeat. Thank you.
All right. Let there be light. All right, what a treat. Thank you. But it's not over yet because we decided that we would provide an opportunity for some questions and answers today. And just one more announcement. We trust that you'll be able to join us for lunch following the event this morning as we continue to recognize all the ways we are connected to one another and the sacred bonds that we continue to invest in when we break bread together. So they have their mic. I have your mic, and I will share the mic with you as you wish to make inquiries about their presentation.